The city was already awake when David started his car that morning. The sound of horns, the chatter of people rushing to work, and the faint smell of street food filled the air. He sat quietly for a moment, rubbing his tired eyes before turning the key. His little girl Lily had been up late studying and he had stayed with her to help. Sleep was a luxury he rarely got, but it didn't matter. What mattered was making sure she had everything she needed, even if it meant working extra hours. David worked as a delivery driver for a local courier company. The pay wasn't great, but it kept food on the table and a roof over their heads. Life wasn't easy since his wife passed away 3 years earlier. He had learned to do everything: cook, clean, and keep the bills paid while trying to stay strong for Lily. Most days he smiled even when he didn't feel like it. He believed that things would get better someday, even if he didn't know how. That morning he was running late for an important delivery. It was a big client, one that could help him earn a small bonus if he completed it on time. The city traffic was terrible as usual, with cars squeezing into every inch of the road. He kept checking the clock on the dashboard, feeling his stomach tighten with every passing minute. If he missed the delivery window, he would lose the bonus, and maybe even his job if the client complained. Finally, he reached the address, a tall office building in the heart of downtown. There were no parking spots available nearby, and the street signs clearly warned against stopping. But he didn't have a choice. The security guard outside the building looked strict, and the delivery had to be made within 5 minutes. David's mind raced. He saw a small empty space near a loading zone, just close enough for him to slip in for a few minutes. He parked the car, turned on the hazard lights, and took a deep breath. "I'll be quick," he told himself as he grabbed the small brown package from the passenger seat. Inside the building, the lobby was bright and polished, filled with people in suits walking fast with phones pressed to their ears. David stood out in his worn-out jacket and scuffed shoes, but he didn't care. He approached the reception desk and asked for the recipient's name. The woman behind the counter gave him a polite smile and called upstairs to confirm. Every second felt heavy. He shifted from one foot to the other, trying to stay calm. After what felt like forever, someone finally came down to receive the package. David handed it over, got the signature, and sighed in relief. The delivery was done, and he still had time to make it to his next stop. But when he stepped outside, his relief vanished instantly. There it was, a bright yellow parking ticket stuck to his windshield. He froze for a moment, staring at it. The street was empty except for a few cars and the sound of a police whistle in the distance. His heart sank as he walked over and pulled the ticket off. The fine was almost half of what he earned in a day. His hands trembled slightly as he read the details. He had been gone less than 10 minutes. Just 10 minutes. David sat down in the driver's seat and leaned his head against the steering wheel. He wanted to scream, but no words came out. The weight of exhaustion and frustration pressed down on him. It wasn't just about the ticket. It was about everything that kept piling up. Rent was due next week. Lily needed new shoes for school, and the old car was starting to make strange noises every time he drove uphill. He couldn't afford this. For a moment, he just sat there, staring out the windshield, watching people walk by. Most of them didn't even notice him. They were too busy with their own lives, rushing to offices, coffee in hand, unaware that someone nearby was fighting to keep his life from falling apart. A woman across the street looked at him for a brief second. She seemed to notice his slumped shoulders, the look of defeat on his face. But before he could wonder if she'd say something, she turned and walked away. He folded the ticket carefully and placed it in the glove compartment, next to the growing pile of unpaid bills. He turned the key and the car coughed before starting. The sound reminded him again that he couldn't afford to replace it anytime soon. As he pulled into traffic, his eyes burned, but he blinked quickly, not wanting to let the tears fall. He had a long day ahead and no time to feel sorry for himself. Hours passed and David finished his deliveries, though his mind stayed heavy. When he picked up Lily from school that afternoon, he forced a smile. She ran to the car with her backpack bouncing and a drawing in her hand. "Look, Dad, I got a gold star today," she said proudly. Her excitement made his chest ache in a good way. He smiled back genuinely this time. "That's amazing, sweetheart," he said. "You're the smartest kid I know." They stopped by a small bakery on their way home. It wasn't something he could afford to do often, but he decided to buy her a small cupcake to celebrate her achievement. As she ate it happily in the back seat, he thought about how she deserved so much more. A better home, a better life, something more than constant worry and secondhand clothes. He promised himself silently that he would find a way to give her that, no matter what it took. That night after Lily went to bed, David sat at the kitchen table with his worn-out notebook. He listed his expenses and tried to figure out how to stretch his next paycheck. The parking ticket stared at him from the corner of the table. He had taken it out earlier, hoping there might be a way to dispute it, but deep down he knew there wasn't. The fine had to be paid, or it would double. He sighed and rubbed his forehead. The clock ticked slowly on the wall and the sound felt louder than usual. He thought about skipping a few meals to save money or delaying the electric bill for another week. These weren't new thoughts, just familiar battles he fought every month. He closed the notebook, leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. Why does life have to be this hard? He whispered to himself. The silence gave no answer. Outside, the city lights flickered through the small window and the noise of distant traffic filled the night. Somewhere in all that chaos, people were laughing, celebrating, living freely, and here he was, wondering how one small mistake, parking in the wrong spot, had become such a heavy burden. He didn't want to let Lily see him like this. He wanted her to believe that everything was fine, that her father could handle anything. So he took a deep breath and gathered the courage to face another day. The next morning came too soon. The alarm buzzed at 6 and the cycle began again. He made breakfast, packed Lily's lunch and dropped her off at school before heading to work. As he drove through the same busy streets, he passed by the building where he got the ticket. His stomach tightened again, but he forced himself to look away. He didn't know it then, but that one moment, one ticket, was about to change his life in ways he couldn't imagine. That afternoon, while refueling the car, he noticed the same woman from the other day, the one who had seen him sitting in his car looking defeated. She was across the street holding a coffee and talking to someone. For a second their eyes met again. She gave a small, almost knowing smile. It was brief, but somehow it eased something inside him. Maybe she remembered him. Maybe not. But it was the first bit of kindness he'd felt in days, and even that tiny moment mattered. As he drove off, David thought about how life could be strange. Sometimes everything went wrong at once, but sometimes help came from places you least expected. He didn't know that in just a few days he'd walk into the city office to pay that ticket, and something waiting there would change everything for him and his daughter forever. That night, before going to bed, he checked on Lily. She was fast asleep, her small hand clutching her favorite stuffed bear. He smiled softly, brushed her hair from her face, and whispered, "One day things will be better. I promise." He turned off the light and stood there for a moment, letting the quiet fill the room. Outside, the world kept moving, but for David, time stood still. He didn't know it yet, but a stranger's unseen kindness was already on its way, ready to turn his bad day into the beginning of something beautiful. A week had passed since David found the yellow parking ticket on his car, and it still sat folded neatly in his glove compartment. Every time he reached for something, his eyes fell on it, reminding him of how unfair life could be sometimes. He kept telling himself he'd deal with it soon, but the truth was he didn't have the money yet. He had already stretched his last paycheck to cover rent and groceries, and there wasn't much left. Each day felt heavier than the last. The thought of unpaid fines haunted him. He'd heard stories of small tickets turning into big problems, extra fees, court letters, even his car being taken away. The car was his lifeline. Without it, he couldn't work. Without work, he couldn't feed his daughter. The pressure was constant, sitting in his chest like a weight that wouldn't lift. One morning, after dropping Lily off at school, he finally decided to face it. He drove downtown to the city's payment office, a dull gray building with long lines and tired faces. The parking lot was crowded, and he found a spot at the very back. As he walked in, the sound of people arguing with clerks filled the air. Everyone there seemed frustrated about something. Bills, tickets, fines. It made him realize how common struggle really was. He took a ticket from the small machine near the door and waited for his number to appear on the screen, sitting on the hard bench. He watched people come and go. Some looked angry, some nervous, and a few looked like they had just given up. He wondered what their stories were. Maybe they were just like him, trying to do their best, but life kept throwing obstacles in their way. When his number was finally called, he walked to the counter. The woman behind the glass looked up from her computer. Her expression was neutral, the kind that came from seeing hundreds of people a day. "Ticket number?" she asked in a flat tone. David slid the paper under the small opening. "Here," he said softly. "I came to pay this." She typed for a moment, her nails clicking against the keyboard. "That will be $75, she said, not looking up. David's stomach tightened. He had known the amount, but hearing it out loud made it worse. He opened his wallet slowly, pretending to count the cash, but he already knew he didn't have enough. He had $53 and some coins. He swallowed hard. "I don't have the full amount right now," he admitted quietly. "Is there any way I can pay part of it and the rest later?" The woman sighed, still typing. "Sorry, sir. Payments must be made in full. Otherwise, additional fees will apply after the due date." Her words hit him like a wall. He stood there trying to think of what to do. Maybe he could borrow money from a coworker, but he had already asked for help once before. Maybe he could sell something, but there wasn't much left to sell. He felt the familiar sting of helplessness rising again. Then the woman looked at her screen, paused, and frowned slightly. "Wait," she said, her tone changing. "There's a note on your file." David blinked. "A note?" "Yes," she said, reading carefully. "It says this fine has already been paid." He stared at her, confused. "What? That can't be right." "I didn't pay it," she checked again. "It says it was paid yesterday afternoon. A cash payment, and there's an envelope here for you." She bent down behind the counter and came back up with a small white envelope, his name neatly written on the front. David hesitated. "Are you sure this is for me?" The woman nodded and handed it over through the slot. "That's what it says. Looks like someone wanted to help." His hands trembled slightly as he opened the envelope. Inside was a small stack of bills, exactly $75, and a folded note. The handwriting was neat, a little slanted, written with care. He unfolded it and read quietly. "Everyone makes mistakes. I hope this small kindness reminds you that the world still cares. Please don't lose hope. KB." For a moment, everything around him disappeared. The noise of the room, the chatter, the frustration, it all faded. He read the note again, making sure he hadn't imagined it. Someone had paid his fine. Someone had gone out of their way, not for attention, not for thanks, but just to help. He looked up at the woman behind the counter, still holding the note. "Do you know who this is?" "KB?" She shook her head. "No idea. People sometimes leave anonymous payments, but it's rare. You're lucky, sir." Lucky. That word echoed in his mind as he walked back to his car. For the first time in a long while, he felt something warm spread through his chest. Gratitude, relief, and something else. A feeling he hadn't felt in months. Hope. He sat in his car and stared at the note again. He tried to think who could have done this. Maybe someone from work, but no one there even knew about the ticket. Maybe a stranger who saw him that day sitting in the car with his head down. Could it be that woman across the street? He remembered her faint smile, how she had looked at him for a brief second before walking away. He didn't know. And maybe it didn't matter. What mattered was that someone cared enough to do something kind, expecting nothing in return. As he drove home, his eyes kept glancing at the note on the passenger seat. The words felt almost magical. The world still cares. That night, he showed the note to Lily. She was sitting at the table working on her homework when he placed it in front of her. She looked up, puzzled. "What's this, Dad?" "Read it," he said softly. She read it out loud, her small voice careful with each word. When she finished, she looked at him wide-eyed. "Someone paid for your ticket?" He nodded, smiling. "Yes, can you believe that?" She smiled too, a little grin spreading across her face. "That's so nice. Maybe they're like a secret angel or something." David chuckled. "Maybe they are. Whoever they are, they did something I'll never forget." Lily leaned her chin on her hand. "So what are you going to do now?" He looked at her, thinking, "I guess I'll try to be that person for someone else someday. You know, help someone who needs it." She nodded seriously, as if she fully understood. "Yeah, like a kindness chain." He laughed softly. "Exactly. A kindness chain." Later that night, after Lily went to bed, David sat by the window holding the note in his hand again. The city lights flickered in the distance, and he thought about all the times he had felt invisible, how easy it was to believe that no one cared. But this one small act had changed something deep inside him. It reminded him that people could surprise you, He opened his old notebook and slipped the note between the pages, next to a list of unpaid bills and scribbled reminders. It didn't erase his problems, but it gave him strength to face them. He whispered to himself, "There are still good people out there." The next day he woke up lighter than usual. The worries were still there, but they didn't weigh him down the same way. At work, his coworkers noticed the change in him. He smiled more, even joked a little. When one of them dropped a box of deliveries by accident, David was the first to kneel and help, laughing it off instead of getting frustrated. At lunch, he took out a sandwich and thought again about KB. Whoever that person was, they had no idea how much they'd done. It wasn't just about the money. It was about restoring something he thought he'd lost. That evening, he stopped by a small flower stall on his way home. He didn't have much, but he bought a single white rose. He placed it in a glass of water on the kitchen table beside the note. When Lily asked why, he said, "It's for whoever helped us. We can't thank them in person, but we can still be grateful." As the days went by, the rose eventually wilted, but David kept the note safe. Sometimes, when he felt tired or hopeless, he'd take it out and read it again. Each time it reminded him that even small kindness could carry great power. He didn't know it yet, but this simple act would ripple far beyond him. It would shape how he saw the world, how he treated others, and how he raised his daughter. The kindness of one stranger had quietly begun to transform his life, and soon he would have the chance to do the same for someone else. Months passed, and David's life slowly started to look different. It wasn't that everything suddenly became easy. He still had bills to pay, long hours to work, and days when he felt drained. But something inside him had changed. Ever since that mysterious note and envelope appeared, he saw the world differently. He noticed small things he used to ignore, like how people held doors open for strangers or offered directions with a smile. Those moments made him believe that kindness still lived quietly in everyday life. At work, David began to stand out. He was always on time, never complained, and often helped others finish their deliveries. His boss started trusting him with important routes. One afternoon, the manager called him into the office. "You've been doing great lately," he said with a nod. "Reliable, honest, always polite to clients. I think it's time we give you a little more responsibility." David was surprised. He had never asked for anything. He just did his job and tried to stay out of trouble. "Thank you," he said, almost shyly. The manager smiled. "Starting next week, you'll be handling our express deliveries. It comes with a small raise. Not much, but you've earned it." For a moment, David didn't know what to say. A raise might not mean much to others, but for him, it was everything. He shook the manager's hand firmly and walked out of the office with a quiet sense of pride. That evening, he picked up Lily from school and stopped by the grocery store on the way home. Normally, he stuck to a tight list: rice, bread, milk, and some vegetables. But this time, he grabbed a small box of her favorite cereal and a bag of her favorite candy. When she noticed, her eyes lit up. "Dad, we haven't had this in months," she said excitedly. He smiled. "Well, I think we both deserve a little treat." When they got home, he cooked dinner, humming softly while Lily told him stories about her day. Life wasn't perfect, but it was peaceful. He found comfort in knowing that things were moving forward, even if slowly. Weeks later, one rainy evening, David was driving home after a long day of deliveries. The streets were slick, and the sound of raindrops tapping against the windshield made the drive feel heavier. He turned down a quiet road, headlights cutting through the gray mist. That's when he noticed a car parked on the shoulder, hazard lights flashing. A young woman stood beside it, holding her phone up as if trying to get a signal. Her umbrella had flipped inside out from the wind, and she looked cold and worried. David hesitated for a second. It was late, and he was tired. But something inside him told him to stop. He pulled over behind her car, turned on his hazard lights, and stepped out into the rain. "Everything okay?" he called out. The woman looked up, startled, then sighed in relief. "Oh, thank God. My tire's flat and I don't have a spare. My phone's dying too. I've been standing here for almost half an hour." David glanced at the car. The tire was completely flat, and the woman clearly didn't know what to do. She was dressed for an office job, not a roadside emergency. "Don't worry," he said. "I've got some tools in my car. Let me see what I can do." He grabbed his old toolkit and a small pump from the trunk. It wasn't much, but it might be enough to get her to the nearest gas station. Rain ran down his jacket as he crouched beside her car. She tried to hold the umbrella over him, but the wind kept blowing it away. "You don't have to do this," she said. "You'll get soaked." David smiled without looking up. "It's just water. I've been through worse." He worked quietly, tightening bolts and checking the pressure. The ground was muddy and his hands were numb, but he didn't stop. The woman watched him, amazed at how calm he seemed. Finally, after several minutes, he managed to inflate the tire just enough to move the car safely. "That should get you to a repair shop," he said, standing up and wiping his hands. "It's not perfect, but it'll do for now." She looked at him, her eyes full of gratitude. "You have no idea how much this means. I was starting to panic. Let me pay you something for your time." She reached for her purse. David shook his head immediately. "No, please, keep it. I don't want anything." "But you helped me," she insisted. "At least let me—" He cut her off gently, smiling. "Someone once helped me when I needed it the most. They didn't ask for anything either. Just do the same for someone else someday. That'll be enough." She paused, lowering her hand slowly. "Pay it forward," she said softly. "Exactly," he replied. For a moment they stood there in the rain, both silent but connected by something unspoken. She smiled through the drizzle. "Thank you," she said sincerely. David nodded, got back in his car, and drove away. In his rearview mirror he saw her standing there, still watching until his taillights disappeared into the wet night. When he got home, Lily was waiting by the window, worried. "You're late, Dad," she said as he walked in, dripping wet. He laughed, shaking the rain from his hair. "Yeah, the rain slowed me down. But you know what? I helped someone tonight." Her eyes widened. "Really?" "Yeah," he said, taking off his jacket. "A lady's car broke down. I fixed her tire so she could get home." "That's so cool," she said, beaming. "You're like a hero." He chuckled softly. "Not a hero, sweetheart. Just doing what someone once did for me." Lily thought for a moment, then smiled. "That's the kindness chain, right?" He nodded proudly. "That's right." Over the next few days, that night stayed in his mind. He kept replaying the moment he told the woman to pass the kindness on. It made him realize how powerful simple actions could be. He didn't have much money, but he had time, and sometimes that was enough to change someone's day. At work, he started helping more, covering shifts, offering rides, bringing extra sandwiches to share with coworkers who forgot their lunch. People noticed. Some called him too nice, but he didn't mind. He remembered how it felt to be helped without being judged, and he wanted others to feel that too. One weekend, Lily asked if they could do something special. "Can we go hand out food to people who need it?" she said. "Like those people who sleep near the train station." David looked at her proudly. "That's a wonderful idea." They spent the morning making sandwiches together, wrapping them in foil and packing bottles of water. Then they drove downtown, handing them out one by one. Some people smiled, some were shy, but every thank you warmed David's heart. On the way home, Lily leaned against the window, watching the sunset. "It feels good to help people," she said softly. David glanced at her, his heart full. "It really does." That night, after putting her to bed, he sat on the couch and thought about how far they'd come. Months ago, he was sitting in his car, staring at a parking ticket and wondering how to survive another day. Now, he was helping others, teaching his daughter about kindness, and finally believing that the world could be beautiful again. He took the old note from his wallet, the one signed KB, and read it once more. The paper was worn now, but the words still felt alive. "Everyone makes mistakes. I hope this small kindness reminds you that the world still cares." He whispered quietly to himself, "You have no idea how right you were." Little did David know, the kindness he had passed on was already moving forward, touching lives he hadn't even met yet. And soon, that same kindness would circle back in a way he could never have imagined. Years passed, and time moved quietly, as it always does. David's life had changed in many small but meaningful ways. He still worked as a delivery driver, but now he was a supervisor. His face had a few more lines, and his hair had begun to gray at the edges. Yet there was a lightness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. His daughter Lily was now in college, studying to become a teacher. Watching her grow into a kind and confident young woman filled him with pride. She had inherited his hard-working spirit, but also his compassion. From a young age, she had watched him help people, share what little they had, and never give up hope. It had shaped the kind of person she became. Even though they didn't have much, their small apartment always felt full of laughter, warmth, and the quiet understanding that kindness was what truly made life rich. One sunny afternoon, Lily came home from her part-time volunteer job at a local community center. She looked tired but happy. "Dad," she said, dropping her bag on the table, "you won't believe who I met today." David smiled, sipping his tea. "Someone famous?" She laughed. "No, not famous, but interesting. There's this older woman who volunteers there a few days a week. Her name's Karen Brooks. She helps with the donation drives and teaches kids how to read. She told me the most amazing story today." He leaned forward, curious. "Oh yeah? What kind of story?" Lily sat down across from him, her eyes bright. She said that years ago she saw a man sitting in his car looking completely defeated. He had just gotten a parking ticket. She said she couldn't get his face out of her head. The next day, she went to the city office, paid the ticket for him, and left an envelope with a note. She never told him who she was, she just hoped it would make his day a little better. David froze. His hand tightened around his cup. The sound of Lily's voice seemed distant, like it was coming from far away. His heart started to beat faster, each word hitting him like a wave. "Dad?" Lily said, noticing his expression. "You okay?" He looked at her, his mouth slightly open, then smiled slowly, almost in disbelief. Did she say her name was Karen Brooks?" "Yes," Lily said, tilting her head. "Why? Do you know her?" He let out a soft laugh, part shock, part joy. I think I might." Lily frowned, confused. "Wait, what do you mean?" David leaned back in his chair, looking at the ceiling for a moment before speaking. "You remember that story I told you years ago? About the parking ticket and the envelope?" Her eyes widened. "No way. You mean, she's the one?" He nodded slowly, still trying to process it. "I think so. Karen Brooks. KB. Those were the initials on the note." Lily covered her mouth, stunned. "That's incredible. After all these years." He smiled softly, shaking his head. "I can't believe she's real. I always wondered who it was. I thought maybe I'd never know." There was a silence between them, filled with emotion. It felt like life had just brought a circle to a close, something pure and unexpected. "Dad," Lily said suddenly, "you have to meet her. She's there almost every weekend. I can introduce you." David hesitated. Part of him wanted to rush there immediately, but another part was nervous. What would he even say to her? How do you thank someone who changed your life without even knowing it? A few days later, on a Saturday morning, Lily convinced him to come with her. The community center was a cheerful place, full of color and life. Children laughed as they played games in one room while volunteers sorted food donations in another. As they walked in, Lily spotted the woman near a table filled with books. "That's her," she whispered. David followed her gaze. There she was, a woman in her late 60s with gentle eyes and short silver hair. She wore a simple cardigan and a name badge that read Karen Brooks. She was helping a young boy sound out words from a storybook, smiling patiently as he stumbled over the letters. Lily waited until the boy ran off to play, then walked up to her. "Hi, Ms. Brooks," she said warmly. "This is my dad. He wanted to meet you." Karen turned, her smile widening as she extended her hand. "Oh, it's lovely to meet you. Your daughter is one of our best volunteers." David shook her hand, his throat suddenly dry. "It's an honor to meet you too," he said softly. Karen looked at him curiously. Have we met before? He paused for a long moment, then reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small, worn piece of folded paper, the note he had carried with him for years. He handed it to her silently. Karen's brow furrowed as she unfolded it. Her eyes scanned the words, and for a moment she said nothing. Then, slowly, her eyes filled with tears. She looked up at him, covering her mouth with one hand. "You kept it," she whispered. David nodded. "All these years? That note got me through some of the hardest times in my life." She blinked rapidly, trying to hold back her emotion. "I can't believe this. I never thought I'd meet you. You looked so sad that day, sitting in your car. I almost walked away, but something told me to help. I just couldn't ignore it." He smiled, his own eyes wet. "You changed my life that day. You didn't just pay for a ticket. You gave me hope when I thought the world had forgotten me. Because of you, I started believing in people again. And I tried to live the way you showed me, even though I didn't know who you were." Karen wiped her eyes, shaking her head gently. "I never expected anything in return. I just didn't want you to feel alone. It breaks my heart when people lose faith in kindness." They stood there quietly for a moment, surrounded by the gentle noise of children playing and volunteers chatting in the background. It felt unreal. Two lives connected by a single small act finally meeting after all those years. Lily watched them with tears in her eyes. She felt like she was witnessing something special, something almost sacred. Karen smiled through her tears. "You have no idea how much it means to hear this. Sometimes I wonder if the little things I do even matter. But hearing your story, it reminds me that they do." David nodded. "They do. You might not see the results right away, but kindness never disappears. It travels. It changes people even when you don't realize it." They sat together for a while, talking like old friends. David told her about his daughter, his job, and how that one act of kindness had inspired him to help others. Karen listened with genuine interest, laughing softly at some stories and wiping her eyes during others. At one point she said, "You know, I was going through my own struggles back then. My husband had just passed away and I was feeling lost. Helping you, it helped me too. It made me feel like I still had a purpose." David looked at her kindly. Maybe that's what kindness really is, a way to heal for both sides. Karen smiled. "I think you're right." Before they left, Lily took a photo of them together. Karen hugged them both tightly. "I'm so glad we met," she said. "So am I," David replied. "I'll never forget this." As they walked back to the car, Lily looked up at her father. "See, Dad? The world really does go in circles." He smiled, slipping his arm around her shoulder. "Yeah, and sometimes, if you're lucky, those circles bring the right people back into your life." That night when he got home, David placed the note back in his wallet. But now it wasn't just a symbol of mystery or gratitude. It was proof that one small act of kindness could live on, growing and spreading until it came full circle. He sat by the window, looking out at the quiet street. Somewhere far beyond what he could see, he imagined all the people touched by small kindnesses, just like he had been, and he smiled, realizing that maybe the world wasn't such a big place after all. Months went by after that emotional meeting at the community center. Life returned to its steady rhythm, yet something inside David had changed once again. Meeting Karen had given him a new sense of peace, like a chapter of his life had finally found its ending. But at the same time, it felt like something new was just beginning. Every now and then, he and Karen would meet for coffee. They would sit by the window of a small cafe downtown, sharing stories about their lives, laughing about little things, and reflecting on how one moment years ago had tied their paths together. Karen had become like family to him and Lily. She would visit their apartment often, bringing homemade cookies or flowers from her garden. She and Lily got along like old friends, and sometimes David would just sit back watching them talk, feeling grateful for how life had worked out. One day, while they were sitting at the cafe, Karen looked thoughtful. "You know," she said, stirring her tea slowly, "it's strange how one small act can create ripples that reach so far. You told me my kindness changed your life, but in truth, meeting you changed mine too." David smiled. "I guess that's the beauty of it. You gave hope, and somehow it came back to you." She nodded softly. "I think that's how life works when we give without expecting anything in return." He looked at her, his voice gentle. You ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't stopped that day? Karen smiled, her eyes shining. All the time. But I like to believe the universe has its way of putting people where they're needed. Maybe you were meant to be sitting in that car. Maybe I was meant to walk by. Maybe we both needed that moment. Her words stayed with him for days after that conversation. He started noticing small things around him. People holding doors for strangers, someone giving up their seat on the bus, a neighbor helping carry groceries. He realized how powerful simple acts could be, even if no one talked about them. A few weeks later, Lily invited him to her college for an event she helped organize, a fundraiser for families struggling with financial hardships. She had spent weeks preparing it, inspired by her father's story and the lesson he had learned all those years ago. When David entered the auditorium, he was stunned. The room was filled with students, teachers, and local residents. Posters decorated the walls, and one of them caught his eye. It had a photo of a small envelope and the words, "Kindness costs nothing, but changes everything." He turned to Lily, who was busy setting up at the front.
Did you?
She smiled proudly. "Yeah, I used your story, Dad. Well, a version of it. I didn't use names or anything, but I wanted people to know how one small thing can change someone's life." David felt a lump in his throat. Watching her walk up to the stage to start her speech filled him with emotion. He took a seat in the back, listening quietly as she spoke. She told the audience about a man who once sat in his car, feeling hopeless after a bad day, and how one small note from a stranger reminded him that the world still had good people. She talked about how that act didn't just help him but inspired him to live differently, to be kind even when life was hard. Then she said something that made his eyes well up. "That man is my father," she said softly, her voice steady. "And because of that act of kindness, I grew up believing that compassion is never wasted. It's something we can pass on and it never runs out." The room was silent for a moment, then filled with gentle applause. Some people wiped away tears. David sat still, his heart overflowing with pride. After the event ended, people came up to him, shaking his hand, thanking him for sharing the story through his daughter. A few told him how it inspired them to reach out to others or to forgive someone they had been angry with. Karen was there too. She had come quietly, sitting a few rows away, watching it all unfold. When David saw her afterward, she had tears in her eyes. "You raised an incredible daughter," she said, hugging him tightly. He smiled. "I had some help from a good friend." They laughed softly. That night, when they were all back at the apartment, Lily brought out an old photo frame. Inside it, she had placed a copy of the note Karen had written years ago. Underneath it, she had written in small letters, "One ticket, one act, one life changed forever." "It's a reminder," she said, hanging it on the wall, "of where we started and how far we've come." David stood there looking at it quietly. For years, that little note had been something he carried around, a symbol of hope. Now it was something bigger. It was part of their story, part of their family's history. The weeks that followed were peaceful. David kept working, but he also started volunteering at the same community center where Karen and Lily helped. He didn't do anything grand, just small things. Helping fix shelves, driving supplies, talking to people who were having a rough time. One afternoon, he noticed a young man sitting alone near the entrance. The boy looked about 20, wearing a worn-out jacket, staring at the floor. David recognized that look, the look of someone who felt the world had turned its back on him. He walked over and sat beside him. "Rough day?" he asked gently. The boy nodded without looking up. "You could say that. Lost my job last week. Got a parking ticket this morning. Feels like the universe is against me." David chuckled softly. "You know, I used to think the same thing once. But sometimes the universe isn't against you. It's just testing how much hope you've got left." The boy glanced at him. Half curious, David reached into his pocket, pulled out a small piece of paper and scribbled something on it. He folded it neatly and handed it to the boy. "Here," he said. "Don't open it now. Open it when you get home." The boy looked puzzled but took it anyway. As David walked away, a familiar feeling filled his chest, the same warmth he had felt years ago when he opened that envelope. It wasn't about repaying kindness anymore. It was about continuing it. Later that evening, the boy sat in his small apartment, unfolded the note, and read the words. "When life feels heavy, remember, someone out there believes in you. Don't give up. Better days will come." He smiled faintly, not knowing who the man really was, but feeling a small spark of hope he hadn't felt in a long time. Meanwhile, David sat by his window watching the city lights flicker in the distance. He thought about how everything had come full circle. Years ago, he had been the one who needed kindness. Today, he had passed it on. He realized that life had a quiet rhythm to it, one that connected people in ways they might never see. Every kind gesture, every small act, carried a story that kept moving, touching new lives along the way. Lily joined him by the window, resting her head on his shoulder. "You're thinking about her, aren't you?" she asked. He smiled. "Always. About her and about all the little moments that brought us here." Lily looked out at the night sky. "It's strange. Sometimes I think about how different things would have been if she hadn't helped you that day." David nodded. "Maybe we wouldn't be here like this. Maybe I wouldn't have learned what kindness really means." They sat there quietly, the sound of distant traffic humming below. Finally, he said, "You know, kindness is like a chain. You never see the end of it, but you know it keeps going. Maybe one day,